He was the visionary behind some of America's most iconic custom motorcycles. Paul Teutul Jr. was not only the artistic force behind American Chopper, but also the brains behind building bikes that became a cultural phenomenon. But beneath the sparks, the chrome, and the roaring engines was a family conflict so strong it would cost him nearly everything. His business, his peace, and even his relationship with his father began to crumble under the weight of fame. Was the price too high? And has the hurt ever truly faded? To understand that, we have to trace his early life, his rise at OCC, the explosive feud with his father, the lawsuits, and the painful reality of where things stand now. If you like stories of truth, responsibility, and giving a voice to the voiceless, like this video, subscribe to Spark Science and share it with someone who may need to hear it. Let's begin. Most kids in the mid-1980s spent their afternoons riding bikes, watching cartoons, or playing Nintendo. But Paul Teutul Jr.'s childhood was shaped by something far different. At just 12 years old, while his peers traded baseball cards, Paul Jr. pushed a broom across the oil-soaked floors of Orange County Ironworks, his father's fabrication shop. The workshop was blistering hot, filled with the sting of metal dust and the crackle of welding sparks. To him, this wasn't punishment. It was the start of a unique education, one that taught him hard work long before most kids his age even considered it. Even prior to that, Paul Jr. had been drawn into the world of metal. He would accompany his father onto job sites and sift through the pieces of steel left discarded by the workers. Where others saw garbage, he saw opportunity. He picked up the scraps and made little sculptures out of them. They were rough, unfinished, but they disclosed something significant, an eye for design. In his small hands, cold steel turned into art. Those small creations revealed a sense that there was more to this young mind than meets the eye and ability to take raw material and turn it into meaning. By the time Paul Jr. was 14, he had moved far beyond sweeping floors. He was welding something that raised eyebrows among older men who had spent decades in the trade. Many suspected that he was being favored as the boss's son, and their acceptance came slowly and without much warmth. But they could not deny what they saw. The teenager had remarkably steady hands, a clear vision, and a maturity that seemed far beyond his age. Still, working under Paul Teutul Sr. was never easy. Sr. demanded absolute toughness, sometimes brutally so, insisting that there were no simple, mistakes-only failures. And failing, by his standards, was unacceptable. Paul Jr. learned quickly how harsh the consequences could be if he slipped up. Sr. would not wait for a private moment. His reprimands were loud, public, and unfiltered, echoing across the shop floor. Some employees whispered that it was unfair, but Sr. insisted on it. In his mind, showing his son no favoritism would make him stronger. Pressure makes steel, he believed, and he intended to forge that same steel in his son. The humiliation stung, but it also shaped Paul Jr.'s resilience. Every time his father shut down one of his ideas or scolded him for a minor error, he faced a choice: retreat or push forward. And he always pushed forward. When scolded, he would retreat behind a workbench, take a deep breath, and try again. This became his pattern. He refused to crumble. That same determination would later define the fiery on-screen clashes between father and son that millions of viewers watched unfold. Respect existed between them, but it was rarely spoken and almost never shown. Still, there were moments that revealed the truth beneath the tension. Once, Paul Jr. redesigned a railing to be both stronger and more visually appealing. Sr. initially tore into it, made unnecessary changes, and dismissed it outright. Days later, with no announcement or acknowledgement, Sr. approved the design and used it. This was one of those silent recognitions that spoke volumes beyond praise. A small victory, perhaps, but to Paul Jr. it meant everything. His father's quiet approval spoke more loudly than any praise. In that silence was an unspoken acknowledgement that the son's creativity was valued, even if Sr. rarely admitted it aloud. Those early sparks of artistic vision would grow into a force powerful enough to reshape the future of the Teutul family and ignite some of their fiercest conflicts. By the time Paul Teutul Jr. reached the age of 19, the boy who used to sweep metal shavings, had become a respected tradesman running the railing division of Orange County Iron Works. This was not a title given out of family favoritism. It was earned through long days, late nights, and a level of talent that most people his age couldn't fathom. The railing business wasn't some side project. It was half of the company's income. Clients waited specifically for designs bearing Paul Jr.'s signature, willing to wait longer and pay more for his craftsmanship and attention to detail that stood out in ways no one else's did. Then there were the older, seasoned workers, managing whom was an altogether different proposition. But over time, Paul Jr.'s reliability, skill, and natural leadership won them over. Even the toughest skeptics, men hardened by decades of steel and construction work, learned to respect the young man who could not only weld but lead. Success wasn't enough. He knew railings, staircases, and the structural beauty of iron work, but something inside him felt confined. His imagination was outgrowing the predictable lines and practical limits of the trade. At night, he could often be found at his workbench, sketching designs that had nothing to do with construction contracts. Instead, he drew motorcycles, machines infused with attitude, curves, edges, and personality. His notebook became a private sanctuary, a place where his ideas could flow freely without any concern for practicality. These weren't childish fantasies. Either they were the early signs of a creative ambition waiting for the right outlet that came along by chance. In the late 1990s, Paul Sr., always having a soft spot for motorcycles, began to tinker with bikes, once again not for business, but simply as a means of relaxation. One day, he asked his son to help. The day that Paul Jr. revealed his sketches, his father was taken aback. They weren't technical blueprints. They were visions. The lines were sharp, the angles confident, and the overall design had an artistic depth that couldn't be ignored. For Paul Sr., a man down to his marrow, rooted in muscle and old-school grit, this was a revelation. After years of working side by side in the iron shop, more often at odds with each other than in sync, they had finally found something that united them. With motorcycles, father and son could merge their strongest qualities. Senior brought strength, discipline, and tradition. Junior brought artistry, detail, and imagination. Together, they were creating something neither could have achieved alone. This partnership laid the groundwork for what would become one of America's most legendary custom motorcycle shops. And in 1999, Orange County Choppers was born. About $175,000 in seed capital was scraped together from the earnings of Orange County Iron Works to start the new venture. But ownership was not evenly split. Paul Sr. held 80%, while Paul Jr. got 20%. Neither one cared at the time. They weren't thinking about contracts, percentages, and legalities in those days, just a father and son building motorcycles in a freezing cold basement with barely enough equipment to get the job done, pushing forward using whatever they had with determination more so than resources. Their first big build was a chopper they christened True Blue, a project which consumed 4 long, grueling months. Nights blurred together as they welded in the garage, sanded imperfections endlessly, and worked through paint jobs that seemed like they would never end. But the result was extraordinary. The bike's blue paint, white flames, and crisp lines made it stand out anywhere it went. When they brought it to Daytona in 1999, people were stunned. This wasn't the work of backyard hobbyists. It was the work of real builders, and the motorcycle community took notice. But those early years were brutally hard. The shop was tiny, freezing in winter, and their equipment broke down almost as often as they used it. Suppliers demanded cash up front, leaving them scrambling for money at every turn. Paul Jr. sometimes worked 18 hours a day and slept on the shop couch just to stay on schedule. Tempers flared constantly. The fights between father and son were not for television. They were rooted in exhaustion, pressure, and the struggle to survive. Every motorcycle barely kept the business alive, but neither of them quit. They kept pushing because both believed the dream was worth the misery. That basement dream would soon explode into a television empire. When American Chopper premiered on March 31st, 2003, nobody in the cramped New York shop had any idea what was in store. Within 3 episodes, the show rocketed to more than 3 million viewers each week. A small contract with modest expectations suddenly transformed into a national sensation. Overnight, the Teutuls weren't just building motorcycles. They were creating unforgettable moments of television for millions to see. The small, once cramped workshop that struggled to pay its bills was now a tourist attraction. Fans wanted photos, autographs, and more than anything, they wanted to see Paul Jr.'s custom bikes. The pressure mounted, the fame exploded, and the cracks that had always existed between father and son began to deepen in ways neither could hide anymore. In the end, the rise of Paul Teutul Jr. became a triumph and a warning. The fame that lifted him into the homes of millions also magnified every crack already present beneath the surface. What had started with a frozen basement dream grew into a cultural force, but its cost was measured not in dollars or ratings, it was measured in bruised bonds, sleepless nights, and a family pushed to its breaking point. But through all the noise, one truth persisted. Paul Jr.'s vision helped reshape an industry and inspired countless builders to believe that artistry and machinery could live side by side.